Welcome YouTube. Sin here. If you found yourself here, it stands to reason you've also stumbled upon Soulslinger Envoy of Death. Hopefully, you are enjoying it, but one thing I discovered was that there just wasn't really any content out there to help point new players in the right direction. So, I decided what the hell, I will throw a guide together. I am not much for long-winded intros that ramble on, so with that being said, why don't we stop wasting everyone's time and get to it. Briefly, we will start off with the gameplay loop. It is about as basic as they come. And I probably don't need to explain this part, but we will just in case there's anyone in here that hasn't played the game yet and they're simply curious. It is fairly simple. Enemies spawns. You shoot said enemies until there is nothing left. Then, you move on to the next stage. Enemies range from really weak and basic, up through some pretty stout bosses that hit back pretty good. Even though some of the smaller and weaker enemies don't seem to be too fearsome on their own, remember if you let them mob you, they can still take you down pretty quick, especially in the early stages of the game. But before you can get in there and get to killing, let's start with a tour of the place, so you know what's what and the various ways you can gear up your envoy. Haven. So, welcome. This is Haven, your home away from home. When you load in or after one of your undoubtedly many deaths, you will spawn in right here. From here, you just have to make your way to the portal or to whichever station you need to visit. I am not sure if we can expect more to come as the game grows, but for right now, what you see is what you get. So, this is Lady Valerie. Outside of a few basic plot elements in the early stages, she doesn't really bring much to the table other than a few one-liners that won't offer much in the way of substance. I just walked past her, at this point. As we continue on, you will see the power totem. We will dive more in depth to each of these, later, but this one is for some basic upgrades to your character and some resource gathering bonuses. Next is the Well of Tears. Again, more later, but this one gives us some upgrades ranging from slight to very strong. You're going to spend some time here. Heading down the stairs, you'll see Liza, likely a loving memorial to a developer's lost friend. Don't sweat it if you don't see her. She didn't show up until I progressed the story a bit, not that she is a plot element or anything. And here is everyone's favorite wraith. Death. He moves around a bit and you may find him in a couple different locations, but this is where he usually hovers about. Outside of some conversations to further the plot a bit, you don't interact with him in a meaningful way, either. The big glowing gate next to Death is not for us. At least not yet. Maybe one day we will be granted passage to the other side. Until then, we get to hang out in limbo and keep killing things. And the last notable item down here is the bestiary. We will revisit this one a bit later down the line, as well. Back up the hill, we will make our way up to the Orb of the Seer. This one doesn't do anything more than track your progress. You can see stats from your last run or all-time stats for your entire soul-slinging career, here. And next to that, you have the workshop. This is where you will craft new weapons and relics to help you along the way. Again, I will get in the weeds on the workshop very shortly, but this is a very important station. And lastly, the blue portal. I don't know if it has an actual name or if it is just the doorway to the action. Either way, when you are ready to get behind the trigger and start slaughtering cartel, this is the way. Well, that is the $2 tour. Now that you have a general idea of where things can be found, let's get to the details and how they are going to help keep you alive long enough to stick it to the cartel. First stop. The workshop. When you take your first steps into Soulslinger, you don't really have much in the line of options. You have your trusty 6-shooter and that is about it. But once you really get in the mix, you start unlocking the ability to craft new weapons pretty quickly. And if I am being honest, some of those I wish I hadn't wasted the time, resources or weapon slots on. I suggest you read the descriptions and listen to the guide to learn which weapons you think will fit your playstyle best, so you don't waste precious material and time, in turn, slowing your progress down. Your first 6-shooter is the trusty Soul Revolver. While it is as bare bones as they come, it is also a solid performing and fun weapon. It comes with a fire element, does light to moderate damage and holds 6 rounds. You can fire off rounds as fast as you can pull the trigger and it has one of the fastest reload times in the game. Speaking of reload, don't forget, you can drastically cut your reload times with a well-timed click. It takes some practice, but before you know it, you will be doing perfect quick loads without even looking at the meter. Anyhow, the Soul Revolver is going to be your all reliable for a bit, as you grind material and find new weapon schematics. With the right perks and relics, this gun can take you far. Next up is our fistful of boomstick, the double-barreled Fury. So far, It is the only shotgun in the game. While not as accurate as a 6-shooter, it hits like a truck. It comes packed with an electric element, and holds 2 shells. 2 quick trigger pulls and you are unloading a massive double blast of damage. And the reload isn't that bad, compared to the other weapons in the game. It reloads only a second slower than the quickest of the 6-shooters in the game. The double-barreled Fury also has the benefit of a unique perk. The second bullet deals a bonus 45% damage to stunned or burning targets. That can definitely help get you through a fight. Vengeance was the second revolver I crafted. If I am being honest, I wish I hadn't wasted my time with this one. I have revisited this one a couple of times and I still can't make it do what I hoped it would. Vengeance is the weakest of all the weapons as far as base damage and it packs a 9-round cylinder. It also carries a bonus fire element and it's tied for the fastest reload sequence in the game. I initially thought its unique perk would be very useful, but having to take damage to do extra damage ends up being more trouble than it's worth. Anyhow, its perk is that once you have taken damage your next 4 bullets are overcharged and do more damage, plus become homing bullets, locking onto your target. Again, I wanted to like this firearm. It just didn't work out how I had hoped. Give it a shot. Maybe you will find better use for it. The Night Quartet. This thing is a beast. You won't find me in limbo without the Night Quartet. The Night Quartet has moderate damage, shadow element and no practical magazine or cylinder. But don't get ahead of yourself, it isn't a semi-auto cannon with unlimited ammo. It does have an overheating mechanic to help balance it. Play around with it and perfect the different cadences that allow you to pump out continuous damage and avoid that long 5 seconds cooldown once it does overheat. Once you master it, it is a street sweeper, for sure. The perk reads, as long as it doesn't overheat, you can keep firing without a reload and they mean it. Rapid fire a quick quad blast at a beefy enemy and you will do massive damage, but be forced to wait 5 seconds before the quartet is ready for action, again. Space your blasts, efficiently, and you can avoid that cooldown while continuing to clear the battlefield. One thing to note, is that even though it doesn't have a magazine or cylinder, per se, if you have a bullet mod in perk slot 1, it will only apply to your next 4 shots, as if it has a 4-chamber cylinder. The Silver Defiler is as badass as its name. I carried this baby for a good bit and it never let me down. Well, as long as my targets weren't floating up in the air, that is. This pistol is basically a mini grenade launcher. It has a poison element and does heavy damage. It even boasts being part of that tie for the fastest reload in the game. All in all, it is really strong and you won't go wrong taking it into battle. So, what gives? The Defiler fires a lob projectile that leaves an acid pool on the ground upon impact. That arc trajectory can be good and bad, but more often than not, it is a hindrance. The airborne targets and roof dwellers can end up being a bit of a pain to deal with, but once you get the ballistic drop figured out, it is very satisfying jumping around lobbing mini poison bombs at enemies. Like I said, this one is strong. It has great wave clear and is even my preferred way of killing one of the bosses. The Wraith Shot. This is my go-to. Yes, it fires slow. You're going to spend a lot of time reloading it, but they had to balance it somehow. The negatives are well worth it, in my opinion. It does take some getting used to, but the massive damage is well worth it. The biggest drawback is that it is a single-shot pistol. Even though it has the same reload speed as the fastest reloading pistol in the game, you are only loading 1 round, rather than 6 or 9. You are reloading way more often. So, the reload feels very slow and cumbersome. You definitely need to master the quick load mechanic for this pistol. And if that wasn't bad enough, the muzzle velocity is noticeably slower on this weapon. All the other weapons feel like hits can. You pull the trigger. Things explode. With the Wraith Shot, the bullets are much slower. You have to calculate your aim and lead your targets. It can get fairly frustrating at times, as enemies decide to reposition before a medium or long-range shot lands. It definitely takes some practice and some getting used to. Now that we got the drawbacks out of the way, let's talk about why this pistol is awesome. If I didn't say it before, this pistol has the highest damage of all the weapons in the game. It even beats the double barrel. So, that single shot is going to be massively felt by your enemies. And I do mean enemies. The first tier of the Wraith Shot's unique perk is infinite bullet penetration. If you are strategic and kite your enemies into a conga line, you can fire one well-aimed round through the entire line of enemies, hitting and likely killing all of them. It is very satisfying to wipe out a long line of rushing mobs. The second tier of our unique perk is also going to bring a lot of value to the table. We haven't talked about traits or perks just yet, but there are a handful of bullet mod traits you can pick up in this game. For instance, you can charge your next cylinder full of ammo with electrified bullets, or poison bullets, or my favorite, lifesteal bullets. Typically, you activate the perk and reload your gun with the newly charged bullets. You fire the cylinder empty and it goes back to normal bullets until the cooldown is up and you activate it again. Not with the Wraith Shot. You never have to activate the perk to get the benefit of them special ammo. Every single bullet that comes out of the barrel of the Wraith Shot has the bullet ability already applied. So, you are always doing extra damage or healing yourself, depending on which trait you found. It is game-changing and the reason why it is always on my hip. I think that pretty well covers the weapons that are available at the time of recording this. Let's move on to the other items hiding in the workshop. Relics are basically a collection of assorted buffs that help you with damage, items or material collection. Just like the aforementioned weapons in the game, you have to find the schematics in various places in the game. Some come from progression. Some you may have to buy from Deadeye. Remember, after you craft each relic, you can likely come back and upgrade it to the next tier, later. Sometimes it takes finding another schematic and sometimes it is simple as finding the required materials. The first relic is the Unclouded Eye. I got this one pretty early on and don't remember what it was like before I had it. It provides a glowing outline for your enemies, aiding in quick target acquisition. It isn't game-breaking, but it is definitely worth crafting, in my opinion, as things will get pretty hectic later on in the game. This next relic is game-breaking, if you ask me. The Charm of Accuracy gives you bonus damage each time you clear a stage without missing a shot. That sounds like a daunting task, but it happens more often than you think. And each time you manage to finish a fight without an errant shot, it gives you a stacking bonus of damage. Once you get deep in the levels, your bonus might be more than your base damage, meaning you are a rolling cannon. Craft this as soon as you can. Trust me. Early on, I didn't do much with gold, as I rarely spent any time with Deadeye at the Emporium. Once I realized some of the things he had to offer could be pretty strong, I started crafting the gold relics. The Purse of Prosperity is one of those items. It allows you to carry a percentage of your gold out if you die. That could be the difference in an extra healing or damage buff next time you find the Emporium. The second gold harvesting relic is the Scroll of Wealth. Fully upgraded, it causes dropped gold to remain on the ground and lootable for an extra 5 seconds. This can be huge, as standard gold disappears fairly quickly in the heat of battle. Again, the more gold you have, the stronger you can become after a visit to the Emporium. The Burning Gloves is one of those perks I am on the fence about. Late game, I think it is great to have, as it definitely helps with the Sentinel boss fight. Early game, though, I would rather pick up one of the other ultimates to use more often, as I was much weaker and needed the help early on. Anyhow, Burning Gloves gives you a one-time use of the ultimate perk, Unshackled Fire. Basically, no matter the weapon, you can fire it semi-auto as many times as you can pull the trigger in 8 seconds. No reloading. No overheating. Just rapid-fire chaos. Devastating, is the word that comes to mind. The last relic on the list is the Amulet of Valor. This one flies under the radar a bit, but I think is fairly strong and definitely worth a craft. The Amulet of Valor increases the likelihood of you finding higher-tiered weapons. Higher-tiered weapons means more damage. That is definitely a win. The last item is the Soul Forge Rune. Crafting this rune means the Soul Forge is open for business. Keep your eyes open for it while clearing stages. If you take the time to upgrade this rune, that means the Soul Forge is more likely to appear. What exactly is a Soul Forge? It is location that allows you to upgrade certain perks, for free. So, this can definitely bring some quick and real value to your playthrough. So, that does it for the workshop. Which weapon are you looking forward to the most? Let me know in the comments. Or maybe which perk you think will pair best with your already favorite weapon. The possibilities are endless. Now that you have a good understanding of the weapons you can craft, let's talk about the core gameplay. As I mentioned previously, the name of the game is Killing. Your goal is to fight your way through each stage and live long enough to pick up some upgrades to help get you to that final boss fight. With each stage you will find a random assortment of enemies. Dispatch them as you see fit and you will find a couple rewards waiting for you. There is always at least one reward, a primal essence. Sometimes, you are lucky enough to also have a weapon upgrade waiting for you, as well. The primal essences are your main source of upgrades in each playthrough. They give you a choice of 3 known abilities or perks, plus a 4th option that is a random stat boost, in case you don't like any of the abilities above. You may get a resistance buff or increased health, among other things. As far as the perks go, I will dive deeper into them shortly. After you choose your perk, you will want to check out your weapon upgrade, if there is one available. Unlike the primal essence, you can opt to back out and not take the weapon if it isn't a worthy upgrade. And trust me, the weapons you choose to carry with you will make a huge difference in determining your success in each playthrough. So, you got your primal essence and your new weapon. Now, you will notice there are gates scattered around the current stage. Sometimes there is just one, but more often than not, you have a handful to choose from. These gates will take you to the next stage and your next battle, but it isn't that simple. You are going to the next battle, regardless, but you should also think of these gates like stores in a mall. If you have a specific material or perk you want to pick up, you need to go to the right store to find your desired purchase. Some of the best perks are tied to specific essences. So, make sure you pay special attention to the essence/perk breakdown, because you aren't guaranteed to stumble across any specific essences or perks. You are going to want to choose an efficient path to maximize the likelihood that you will have the chance to get the perks you want. Now that you know the general idea on how to find your perks, let's take a deeper look into what these perks actually do and where to look for them. Just a moment ago, I said to think of the gates as individual stores in a mall, right? Well, think of this section as your mall directory. These are the various resources, essences and special gates that will be available for you to go shopping. So, let's dive right in. The top 3 you see there are simply resources. Those won't mean much to you in an individual fight, but they are definitely important throughout your journey in Limbo. These are the main components that you will use to craft your weapons, relics and various upgrades. So make sure you are collecting plenty of blueprints, tears and embers, as you are going to rip through them. The heart of your upgrades are going to come from the various essences you see here. Each one has specific perks and traits that are centered around a certain element. For example, the perks from the Toxic Essence gates all do some form of poison damage. The Blazing Essences all apply a form of burn and so forth. And these reset for each attempt. That means each playthrough can be vastly different from the last. Perks are going to make or break you, honestly. So, let's talk about each of them real quick. Soul Essence is where you will find base perks called Lesser Essences. These are not tied to any form of elemental damage. They, instead, offer straightforward upgrades, like various damage and healing boosts. Even though there is not any specific elemental damage tied to the soul gates, don't sleep on these, as the perks can be quite nice, especially when stacking them or pairing them with other essence perks. Essence of Risk is poorly named, as it doesn't offer much risk. 3 or 4 enemies poured in. Drop them and you get another random primal essence with 3 new perks. It is an easy shot at 3 new perks. Gentle Touch is another one of my favorites. Who doesn't want a 20% boost on all sources of healing? Shared Trauma can be good if you are finding yourself surrounded by mobs frequently. As you take damage, enemies near you will also take damage. Healing Tears is really not worth it once you start using the Wraith Shot and can get yourself the Vitality rounds. If you don't have the Vitality rounds it can be useful, though. Resilience is nice if you want some damage reduction. This one stacks, thankfully. I have gotten this up to nearly 20% a couple of times. Slayer's Streak is one of my favorites. It stacks, as well. So, keep finding this perk and you can get some really nice bonus damage on your next shot following a kill. If you find yourself often missing a significant chunk of your health, Wounded Ascension can offer peace of mind in the form of bonus damage based on missing health. Moving right along, let's talk about Shadow Essence perks and the Mark of Darkness. Many of the perks in here offer ways to apply or take advantage of the bonus damage that comes with marking enemies. My favorite second slot perk is just one of those perks. Dark Reflections. It drops a couple AI teammates on the battlefield that will remain where you activated the perk and fire at nearby foes every time you pull the trigger. Plus, their shots add the Mark of Darkness, as well. Use them with a fast-firing pistol and you can pump out some serious damage, very rapidly. Tenebrous Strength is simple. It boosts your bonus damage associated with the Mark of Darkness. Excellent to have if you have something in your kit that applies the mark. Darkened Moment isn't going to replace Rock Slide Dash, for me, but if you like a brief time slow with your dashes, this one is for you. I can't say that I have ever chosen Gloaming Strike. Melee is not something I hardly ever use, since it is very weak. Maybe this perk changes that. Let me know in the comments if you find any success using melee with Gloaming Strike. If you are like me, and constantly jumping around, Wings of Night is a good way to apply the Mark of Darkness to hordes of enemies, quickly. Mark of Darkness is a straightforward way to apply the mark. Shoot your enemies and watch them take increased damage with subsequent shots. Creeping Darkness is another one of those perks I love to run, since it adds yet another way to get some nice collateral damage off of marked enemies when they die. It also spreads the mark to nearby enemies when they explode. Double win. If you like fire and applying burn damage to enemies, you are going to love the perks from Blazing Essence. Blazing perks can really give you a nice boost in damage. Explosive rounds are exactly what they sound like. Activate this perk and your next magazine will be full of bullets that explode on impact, dealing extra damage. Remember, bullet effects like this one are automatically equipped to every shot you fire with the Wraith Shot pistol. Again, I am not likely to drop the mobility boost that comes with Roguelite Dash, but if you don't mind slowing down a bit, you can set enemies ablaze with Flaming Dash, just by dashing near them. Flame Barrier is a perk for slot 2 that drops a pillar of flame in front of you. Enemies that are unlucky enough to pass through the flames will receive moderate damage. This isn't one I tend to take frequently, as my playstyle is very mobile. So, I am all over the place and wouldn't likely be staying near the flame wall. The Engulfing Bullets perk can give you some excellent wave clear. Enemies that are already marked with another status effect will explode when you land a shot on them. The Blood Essence perks are centered around health and vitality. These are some of the strongest perks you will find, in my opinion. There aren't many ways to reliably and consistently regain your health in Limbo, outside of perks you will find here. The Weakening perk applies an effect on enemies causing them to take extra damage once their health drops below 25%. Very nice for those stronger foes, especially early game. Essence of Life is a nice boost to your maximum HP. Collect as much health as you can. You are going to need it in later stages. I tend to emphasize max HP over healing percentage. Vampiric Spells doesn't find its way in my hand very often. I don't cast a lot of spells, to be fair. Maybe, in the early stages before I had better gear I could have found it more useful, but a 2% lifesteal with each cast isn't a lot of healing compared to the healing power of the Vitality Bullets. Speaking of Vitality Bullets, they are great for grinding your HP back up. Either activate them to get a fresh magazine full or equip the Wraith Shot to get yourself a 2% heal with every kill shot. This is a perk that I do my best to rush. It is one of the strongest in the game, in my opinion. Again, I am not giving up Roguelite Dash, but if you don't mind too, this is probably the one I would go for. Charging Dash not only damages enemies as you dash near them, but it marks enemies while doing so. Once you mark 25 unique enemies, you will receive an ultimate ability for slot 3. That is a pretty great deal, as all the ultimates in this game are pretty strong, this one included. If the Vitality Bullets aren't offered, I take this one early and get myself an ult before I find Roguelite Dash. Then, I can have the best of both worlds. Blood Transfusion is a fair trade. Drop 10% health and you gain a permanent 20% damage boost. I rarely pass this one up, as it is really easy to get 10% of your health back and 20% damage is a significant boost. Usually, I choose other perks that are more suited to my playstyle in Blood Essence, instead of Shield of Agony. But if I find myself making a third trip through a Bloodgate, I might pick this one up to get myself a shield after each ultimate use. Next stop on the Essence train is Desolate Essence. Desolate perks tend to be a mix of some variation of speed or damage. This one doesn't seem to pop up on a gate very often, so if you want a Desolate perk, I would jump in a Desolate gate the first opportunity you get. Eruption of Shards is a simple but effective way to get some extra damage on mobs, especially if you have stacked some crit chance. Landing a crit causes that same damage to be dealt to enemies within range. Very nice. Since I rarely sacrifice my vitality rounds, I haven't had a great deal of experience with Quicksand Shot. That being said, I made sure to give it a shot a few times. I would much rather have the healing, but if that isn't your style, these rounds are great for area of effect damage and clearing mobs. They not only weaken enemies, but they also deal decent area damage. If you are a fan of applying the weaken debuff on enemies, Sands of Vulnerability is a great acquisition. It uses crit damage to weaken your enemies. Whirling Sands is a bit of a unique perk. I think it is the only perk that directly affects enemies without you having to interact with them. Enemy projectile speeds drop by 40% when they get near you. It doesn't sound too significant, but in the late stages of the game, you have a lot of lead flying around in limbo. This one can really help you avoid taking those hits. If I have been unlucky and not found Dark Reflections yet, as a slot 2 perk, the Dune Guardian can be a decent substitute. It drops a golem on your location and it immediately gets to work on your nearby enemies. And here we have my primary reason for jumping into a desolate gate. Rock Slide Dash is going to reduce your dash cooldown by 80%. No special damage or effects, but the fact you can blink around the battlefield is well worth it, in my opinion. Unless I have been unlucky in finding a desolate gate, you can pretty much guarantee this perk is in my kit. It really comes in handy in the later stages when you need to dodge mobs or make a quick dash away from danger. Grain Strike Precision is another perk that you can stack. It gives you 2% crit chance on every shot. It isn't a lot, but it tends to feel like you get a much better roll than the 2 or 4%. I crit fairly often and I rarely have more than a couple stacks of this one. Since there isn't a visible base stat for me to verify, I am guessing critical chances in the random stat boost pool, as well. Up next we can talk about the Electric Essence and the perks you will find hiding behind an electric gate. As the name implies, these perks are going to be about damage with an electrified aspect. Some even stun. So, these perks can be very viable for clearing limbo of the cartel. The Electric Essence version of a dash effect is the Stunning Dash. As you dash around each stage you will stun and damage nearby enemies. This can definitely make mob clearing easier. Again, I tend to stick with Rock Slide Dash so I can dash 80% more often, but this is a good option if the extra mobility isn't a priority for you. Lightning Strike is a nice slot 2 perk. Channel your inner Emperor Palpatine and launch a directional lightning attack that deals decent damage and stuns enemies in the area of effect. The Electric Essence bullet mod is shock bullets. Seems pretty obvious but these rounds are electrified. The nice thing about them is that they have a piercing modifier, so you can damage enemies in a line with the same round. Sparking Impact is one of my go-to perks. Since I use the Wraith Shot with its penetration ability, this one goes the extra mile. When you land a shot, 1 to 2 sparks jump to nearby enemies and carry 50% of the damage with them. As you can imagine, this makes for some awesome chaining wave clear. Especially if you found any perks that add explosive damage to your shots. Mobs never stood a chance with this combo. Moving on, we have the Toxic Essence. As the name implies, these perks are going to hit enemies with poison effects. They can be nice for tagging mobs and allowing yourself time to escape and dodge while they are still taking damage from the poison counter. Venomous Retaliation isn't just a cool name for a perk. It has the unique ability of hitting enemies with the trusty Uno reverse card. If an enemy lands a ranged attack on you, they will be poisoned, in turn. Personally, I try my best to avoid taking damage in limbo, but it is often unavoidable in late stages. So, it is nice to return some of that damage to the center. You still take the initial damage, but at least you are getting a free licking on them, as well. Poisonous Impact is a dash modifier that adds a poison effect to the area around where you land as you are coming out of a dash. Definitely useful for dashing through mobs and clearing waves of enemies. The Toxic Tier 2 perk is a useful addition to the game. Corrupt Decoy is a nice way to not only take some attention off of yourself, but do some decent damage to a group of enemies, as well. When activated, you will drop a decoy envoy on your location and enemies will move towards it and attack. Once it dies, it explodes into a poison pool, damaging all enemies within range. Outside of the vitality rounds and their healing, Noxious Rounds might be my favorite bullet mod from the standard gates. Not only do they add poison damage to your target, but they also cause an area of effect poison effect around your target, damaging all enemies within range. These are great for clearing hordes of close-packed enemies. The last primal essence we are going to talk about is the Spectral Essence. A bit unique, as you can only find these gates and perks in the Forgotten Garden. The garden is 100% optional, so you can run through the game without ever stepping foot in these stages. That being said, there are some decent perks that hail from the garden. The downside to the Spectral Essence perks is that many of them are centered around spectral enemies which require being in the garden to get any value from them. Sure, they will help you in the garden, but once you get back to Limbo, these perks can lose most, if not all of their value. Phantom Jump replaces your standard dash mechanic with a double jump ability. Not only can you reach higher with the double jump, but when you eventually land, you also do damage to nearby enemies, as well. If jumping is more your style than dashing, this perk is calling your name. And since it is not tied to spectral enemies, it is viable anytime. The Forgotten Garden has not forgotten about your bullet mods. Spectral Shot is a bit more rare, since it is hiding in the garden, but it is likely the strongest damage buff of all the bullet mods. Not only does it fire 4 extra bullets that explode on impact, dealing extra damage, but they are also homing bullets. These things really rip through mobs. These rounds are good for both the garden and your time in limbo. Elusive Protection is one of those perks that require spectral enemies be near to offer much viability. For each spectral enemy left on the battlefield, you will gain 5% damage reduction. As you can imagine, that can stack up to become some serious damage mitigation. Sadly, this perk doesn't do much for you once you head back to limbo. Volatile Dreams, like all the other Slot 2 perks, is a powerful ability intended to help you in a sticky situation. Once activated, 2 spectral blasts emanate from your location and detonate on enemies, causing significant damage all around. This is one of my favorites. While you are in the Forgotten Garden, you will definitely be able to make use of Ghostly Weakness. Any spectral enemy you damage will have said damage increased by 20%. A very welcome boost, but it only applies to spectral creatures. So, I tend to skip this one in favor of planning for the long game back in limbo. But if you are struggling while you are in the garden, this perk could give you the necessary edge to get back to limbo, alive. So, that takes care of our standard primal essences and their respective gates. I may have missed some perks, as there are a great deal of them floating about, but you need to try them all and see how they interact with one another. So, dive in. Experiment and find what works for you and your playstyle. Plus, don't forget the special gates listed below. Most of them have some fairly powerful perks and traits that will significantly buff your stats. Make sure and stick around while we go over them, as well. The first one we will talk about is the Emporium. If you hop through the Emporium gate, you will find yourself in Deadeye's Market. All that gold you have been collecting from fallen enemies has to be good for something, right? Deadeye has 4 random offerings for sale. They can be simple resources, crafting recipes, serious damage buffs, straight-up health refills, or maybe a percentage boost to your healing powers. I like to get most of my damage from the essences and try and get the HP regen from here. Early game, you can get some easy elemental shards or embers of dreams from him. Late game you won't care about them so much, but it definitely helps out in the early stages. You will also want to pick up the craftables he has for sale early on, as well. They can help you progress and gather materials more easily. Late game, though, visiting Deadeye is one of the best ways to gain health and regeneration abilities. He also sells some perks centered around damage, as well. One is a simple shield, blocking your next damage, while others offer a chance to create sparks of damage with landed shots, explosive rounds, or even an ultimate that reduces nearby enemies to a coin stack with the press of a button. Again, take some time and stop into the Emporium whenever you can. Get familiar with his perks and how they interact with your current setup. What else are you going to do with all that gold, anyway? There is even an achievement tied to Mr. Deadeye and his Emporium. Another special gate that can really alter your playthrough is a visit to Death himself. Death's offers aren't as simple and one-sided as the other perks you find in the game. Sure, they are usually significant boosts to your health, damage, or whatever, but with Death there is always a catch. While the buff is permanent, each buff also has a temporary debuff that can range from mildly annoying to significantly putting your life at risk. Timing tends to be key here. I like to try and visit Death as early as possible, so I have time to suffer through his debuff conditions while the levels are a bit easier to navigate. One thing to remember is that if you enter Death's Gate, you have to choose one of the perks. You cannot simply decline and move on. So, choose carefully. And the negative side of these offers seems to be random. You never know which debuff will be applied to which perk and how severe it will be. Sometimes, you get extremely lucky, and sometimes it feels like Death is out to get you. Here are a few examples of Death's offers. If you are focusing on resource grinding, Spectral Scavenger can help out tremendously. It basically multiplies your gathered resources by a stated percentage. I have seen 55 and 95%, but there may be more variants than these. Either way, that is a nice boost in resources for a minor inconvenience. Death's Reprieve is a definite buff. It allows you to survive a single lethal blow. This might be the difference between a trip back to Haven or clearing the final boss. Here you can see that the debuff side of things is not always the same. Permanently losing 20% of my max health is going to sting a lot more than not knowing what is behind gates for a couple rounds, in my opinion. This one is my absolute favorite offering from Death, especially if I am lucky enough to find it early game. With each stage you clear, Harbinger of Death gives you a random stat increase. As you can imagine, once you clear 10 to 15 levels, your Envoy can start to feel unstoppable. Not to be outdone, Death has his own ultimate ability up for grabs. Like all the other ultimates, Soul Shepherd offers quick and significant damage to nearby enemies caught in its path. Death's offers is the only place to find this ability. Considering most damage resistance perks are limited to 2% per stack, Reaper's Resilience is great because it gives you a 7 reduction on incoming damage. Damage reduction can make a huge difference in long drawn-out battles with powerful foes. There are many offers from Death to consider. I wasn't able to find them all, as Death's gates aren't a common option. The important thing to remember is that even though Death has some great buffs, there is always a drawback tied to them, albeit a temporary one. Consider the timing of your visit. If you are 4 gates from the final boss, taking the random stat boost for each level cleared is probably not worth the negative side of the perk, while a 40-point increase in max HP definitely is. Just be smart and think about all aspects of the deal. They can be game-changing, good or bad. Our next unique gate is the Soul Forge. This one isn't nearly as complicated as weighing your options from Death. Here, you only get 2 choices and they are typically based on what perks you already have equipped. The Soul Forge is basically a way to upgrade an existing perk in your arsenal and take it to the next level. Already have Lightning Strike equipped in your second slot? Why not boost the damage and upgrade it to the next tier? Myself, I almost exclusively use it to upgrade my tier 2 ability. The second choice sometimes seems to be an offer of a different bullet mod that I usually don't want, anyway. So, I gladly welcome the chance to upgrade my slot 2 ability. If you have made it far enough along in the story, you may have found a new option for some pretty decent buffs in the form of Nia's Blessings. Some of these are identical to some of the lesser essence buffs, but some are unique and significant stat increases. This is one of the few places you can pick up a 40-point max HP boost, for example. That is definitely worth a trip through Nia's Gate. Considering there are no enemies to kill here, it is not only a good place for some strong buffs, but they are completely free and have no drawbacks. Nia's Blessing rounds off the last of the special gates that offer unique and interesting perks to help you along the way. Rarely do I pass up one of these 4 gates, as they can really impact your playthrough and might even be the difference between a winning and losing the final battle. And speaking of boss fight, the last gate icon we will talk about is the boss fight. If you look at your progress bar that show you the gates you have visited, you'll notice each leg of the journey is 15 gates long. At stage 8 and 15 you will see the skull and bones icon, indicating that there will be a boss fight. Early on, these fights can leave you feeling quite outmatched, but as you unlock better weapons and relics, you will start cleaning up those early game bosses with ease. That being said, after you have finished them off once, you don't have to fight them anymore. You can opt to pass by without the fight, but you will miss out on the resources if you go that route. Myself, I opt to smoke the bosses and snag some extra materials and the perks that come along with boss kills. I find that to be the best return for my time investment. I am not going to dive into each boss fight and detail the strategies and weapons I tend to use. For one, I don't think that is really necessary, as the bosses have been pretty straightforward, so far. The one tip I would offer is to stay mobile. Move and shoot. That being said, if I get a lot of comments and DMs asking for a guide on boss fights, I will work on that, but not right now. This video is long enough as it is. So we've covered the basic gameplay, the gates, essences and your weapons and relics. Those weapons and relics aren't the only ways you can upgrade your Envoy and alter your experience in Limbo. The Power Totem is a very simple and straightforward system for upgrading different elements of the game. Spend your gathered resources to gain some damage and resource buffs. Nothing too tricky here, you just don't want to forget about it, because as you can see on the right, you can get some pretty decent persistent damage buffs. Definitely worth your time to stop by the Power Totem once in a while. Just behind the Power Totem you'll find the Well of Tears. No, that isn't another name for the internet. The name sounds depressing, but there are some serious upgrades hiding in here. The first unlock in here is a healing shrine. Unlock this perk to find random shrines throughout Limbo that will give you 15% of your health back. Revenge simply increases your damage for a few seconds after you get hit. The 2 upgrades also give you some damage reduction during that same time frame. And the last upgrade adds a stun to the mix as well. Gunslinger is possibly the strongest perk in here. This perk allows you to steadily ramp up your damage and get up to a 40% boost just by landing consecutive shots. And the upgrades will allow you to squeeze a bit more damage out of the perk, as well as the last one granting a status boost for performing a successful quick reload. This skill tree is not one to miss. I promise. The Unstoppable skill is going to reward you depending on your current HP level. Starting with a 30% damage boost while at full health and also throwing a couple boosts for being below 10% health, as well. Finishing up, you get some random resources when you clear a stage and have over 80% left. The dash shield is another perk that can very easily save your life. After you dash, you will get a brief moment of 70% damage resistance. Finishing out the next two upgrades, you can bump that up to 100% and make yourself invulnerable in that moment. And the final upgrade gives you the chance to dash immediately after taking damage and earn up to 50% of that health back. If you are still taking a good bit of damage, Impervious might help you even the odds. Once you get below 60% health, you get a one-time restoration of 25% of your health. And if you grab the next two upgrades to go with it, you will add a damage buff to go along with it. And since we like new and shiny toys, the next weapon we find is guaranteed to be of epic rarity. The better your gun, the better your odds of surviving are going to be. Punishment takes advantage of status effects. Once you inflict an enemy with a status effect, they will also become weakened and take more damage and become slower. Finish out this skill tree and that effect will be doubled, as well as causing weakened enemies to drop more gold on the battlefield. The last tree offers up battle shrines. Like its cousin, the healing shrine, you will find these randomly throughout the map. They cost you a little health and offer some pretty stout but temporary buffs to help you clean up limbo. If you complete upgrading this perk, you can keep the perk one round longer, and it also upgrades certain abilities you receive from primal essences. Personally, I don't use these shrines much, since the effects only last a couple of rounds. As you can see, there are a lot of really strong attributes in the Well of Tears. To be able to take advantage of these perks, you are going to need to collect tons of tears and whatever these unnamed resources are. Not sure what they are called, but it took me a bit to figure out how I could earn them. Once I figured it out, it was smooth sailing, though. Basically, you just need to progress through the game normally and then stop down here at the bestiary. Once you discover new enemies, you can come here and read about them, but more importantly you can collect those resources that you will need for the Well of Tears right off of these pages. I assume as the game fills out, so will the bestiary. In the meantime, make sure to claim your rewards so you can unlock everything in the Well of Tears. And lastly, we have the Orb of the Seer. I am slightly bitter that they made me pay to unlock this thing, as it doesn't really do much for you other than give you the ability to track your progress and stats. Here, you can see your last playthrough or your all-time stats. There are no unlocks or anything in here. It is simply a way to monitor a few assorted statistics. So, I think that covers all the elements that we need to go over. I know it is a lot, but I think that is part of what makes this game interesting and fun. You can work different perks and weapons into each playthrough and have a completely new and fresh experience. For my first exposure with an FPS roguelite, I am very pleased with this game in an early access state. For me, it has a moderate amount of replayability and it has been a nice gap filler. I can't wait to see what else they have lined up for us. If there is anything I missed or if any of you have any questions, please feel free to comment or reach out directly and let me know. I will gladly put out another video or answer any questions you may have. Anyhow, that is it for me in this video. I apologize. I know it was long, but we had a lot to go over and I didn't want to skip anything important. Thank you, and we will see you all next time. Sin, out.